All right, so we're on chapter 23, Transoceanic Encounters and Global Connections. I'm going to go through both the second and third headings here, which are trading conflict in early modern Asia and global exchanges. So, um, as we mentioned before, we talked about the reconnaissance or basically mapping out the entire world. That wasn't done just for fun. That was to make money. So again, the Portuguese, the mighty Portuguese, are going to set up trading posts wherever they go, 50 by the mid 16th century. Now, Portugal is too small of a country to really try to control everything. So, whereas they're not trying to establish a trade monopoly, they tried to get away with just charging duty or taxes to people who would come through. Alfonso de Albuquerque was the major naval commander who kind of came up with this idea of the trade duties policy and trying to do whatever he could um, to make it happen. And to do so, why would you pay a tax? Well, because he would, amputate people's hands. It was a very hostile confrontation. That being said, again, Portugal isn't that large of a country, and so a lot of Arab traders and others will be able to just circumvent those trading posts. So by the end of the 16th century, Portuguese control will have basically dissipated. They'll still have trading posts, they'll still have their own bit of an empire, but it will be very much eclipsed by other European powers. Hey, it was a good, 100 or 150 years or so. The two groups that are really going to overtake them is going to be the English and the Dutch trading posts. They are going to be able to create rival and very powerful trading networks. Um, England is going to concentrate on trade with India, whereas the Dutch are going to create basically three hubs in Cape Town, in Colombo, and in Southern Pacific, basically like where Indonesia is. And so, as you can see, a lot of trading posts are created throughout Africa and Asia. And as you can take a look at that, I'll let you do it on your own or in your book. You can see that these European points of power are throughout the area, even a couple in here in Africa. The one place obviously missing here is North America, and we'll talk about that later in a different chapter. Okay, now how is this happening? How are the Dutch and British, again, two countries not known for lots of people, how are they doing this? Well, they did this by creating these trading companies. And so England creates the East Indian Trading Company around 1600. The Dutch create the United East India Company, which, if you actually know the Dutch, actually would be VOC um, as the initial words for the acronym. That was established in 1602. And if you've seen any of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, which I really wouldn't say, except for the first one, so much better than that. Don't waste your time with the others, but the first one's amazing. Anyway, so what happens is that these trading companies weren't just merchants. It was this really weird amalgamation of political and military and economic power. What's happening is that the ships are owned by private individuals, and so the government doesn't have. So they're taking some of the risk on. Now, the government helps to support them and expects some of the profits back. They also are empowered by their governments with the rights to engage in trade, build posts, or even make war. And again, what's going to end up happening is that in another chapter, we'll talk about the increase in gunpowder weapons that they're going to be able to use, which is going to make them very effective. Not unstoppable, but incredibly effective and in many ways better than any other militaries they come across. These trading companies are exceptionally profitable and help Dutch and England, again, not countries known for being particularly big, to create vast sums of money. Europe is going to go ahead and conquer Southeast Asia in many ways. The Spaniards are going to conquer the Philippines, which is named after King Philip, and Manila becomes a major port city. And as the Spaniards bring silver from Mexico to Manila, there's going to be a huge influx of Chinese traders, which is going to make things interesting. They need them, like the trade and the money, but they're going to be represented by both the Spaniards and the Filipinos. It's going to be a bit of a difficult, lawless place to work from the 17th century to the 19th century. A lot of massacres and fighting is going to happen. It's also going to be a spot of a lot of significant missionary activity for the Catholic Church. Now, interestingly, to the south, the Dutch are going to concentrate on that spice trade, like I mentioned, in Indonesia. And so what's going to happen is that they're going to create their own trading post. One of the really interesting things about the Dutch versus especially the Spaniards, but also with the English, is going to be the lack of missionary activity. There's going to be some, but it's not going to be nearly as important as it is to Spain and England. Now, there's other parts of Asia we need to talk about, and that would include the Russian expansion in Asia. So the Russians are going to take over the Mongols' Khanates in about the 16th century, and they're going to create their own trading cities and absorb the Caucasus and expand into Siberia. Okay, so what's Siberia? Russia, big country. So what happens is there's these huge mountain ranges called the Ural Mountains. Essentially, from the to the west of the Ural Mountains, that's considered normally the European part of Russia. Siberia is usually considered anything east of the Ural Peninsula. And again, there's much more land to the east, or the Asian part, than there is the western. They're going to have a little success with really, they're going to trade with the Siberian people, but they're going to have little success in like converting them to Russians at first. And they're going to have to deal with some rebellions. So we can see here, so here we have Moscow or Moscovia, for those of us who have lived there. And they're going to kind of expand around into these areas up here. And this is the Caucasus, which I mentioned before. And then basically the Ural Mountains are basically right here. And so after 1682 is when this great expansion is going to have. Interestingly, the taiga is over here where there's like a little bit of forest. This essentially entire thing is forest. It's incredibly large. Yeah, so that's the expansion. Now, the Russians, to be able to try to take over this land, they want to have outposts there. And so what they do is what they're actually going to do is one of the punishments you're going to have is you could be exiled to Siberia. So what's going to happen is if the government is angry at you and they just want to get rid of you, what they do is they send you to the east, which is a horrible punishment because they're not going to have the ability to come back. The other thing that's going to happen is as population pressures start to grow in the western half of Russia, some disgruntled peasants wanting their own land and ability to take care of themselves are also going to move to the east, and that's going to be helped by the trading posts. And what's going to happen is the Russian population is going to expand dramatically. So what's going to happen is by 1763, so just about 100 years or so of doing this, 100 years, maybe a couple hundred years. What's going to happen is that we're going to have 420,000 Russians in Siberia. So they're going to end up outnumbering the indigenous people 2 to 1. Again, huge amount of land, not easy land to live in. Okay, so and again, this is an example of a convict village in Siberia, which again is going to be kind of, obviously this is a relatively modern image. However, these towns are going to be really kind of ramshackle throughout Siberia. All right. Now, all of this rivalry happening between the European countries is going to create a conflict. And so there are going to be different times and issues between the different European countries. More on that later. It really comes to the head at the very kind of end of this era, beginning of the next, in the 7 Years' War. The two most powerful European countries at this point are going to be the French and the British. And throughout the theaters, theaters means like places where conflict is happening. So Europe, India, Caribbean, North America. There's going to be the French and Indian War, which is going to be kind of absorbed into this, which is the French and the Indians versus the British. What will end up happening is the British will emerge victoriously and establish their control of both India and Canada, and essentially by this point be the most powerful nation in the world. The other thing that's important to talk about is the global exchanges. And many historians will even just call this era of history the Columbian Exchange because it's so important. So the Columbian Exchange is named after Christopher Columbus. And what's important to note is that it's known for its global diffusion, how we have plants and crops and animals and human populations and diseases that are all kind of mixing from different biomes or previously independent biological zones. This is going to change the world after that point for many different reasons. One of which is not only are there good things that transfer, but also bad things. So there are one of the big deals about independent biological systems is different plants, animals, but also diseases exist in different places. So there might be a chance if you went anywhere, you've gone to other places for long periods of time, you might have had to take a shot. You might have to take some shots because again, there's different diseases more prevalent in other parts of the world, and no one wants to, no one's going to be able to be inoculated against everything. So what ends up happening is that especially the Europeans bring smallpox, measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, influenza. Now, what's really difficult about this is as they come into the Western Hemisphere and Oceania, many of those people do not have the natural immunity that would help protect against that. And again, it's not a statement of them being strong or weak. As you'll remember, right before this era, we had the bubonic plague, which killed a bunch of Europeans. Once they were dead, the people who survived are the ones who had some natural immunity. They have more children. And so, again, this exposure is just going to ravage some of the places, especially in North America. It's estimated that the 1519 smallpox hit the Aztec Empire. Their population declined 90% within 100 years, from about 17 million to probably about only 1.3. Some of that is going to be war and issues. Others of it is going to be because of smallpox. What's also important to note is that outside of these germs and diseases, definitely there's going to be exchanges with crops and animals. The Columbian Exchange is going to increase the overall food supply for the world. What's going to happen is there's going to be an introduction of European animals to the Americas. So things like horses, cattle, pigs, and chickens, like you might have in your mind the image of a Native American sitting probably on a horse. That's Columbian Exchange. There were no horses here before the Europeans brought them over. The Americas are going to bring a lot of new food, so like maize, potato, beans, very good staple crops, which are going to be very important for the European, Asian, African diet. And what we'll see is after the Columbian Exchange, when we take a look at the world population, we see a heavy uptake. And then once we hit 1800, again, around there is when we think we hit 1 billion people, and this gets into the Industrial Revolution, and then all heck breaks loose. We'll talk about that in another era. One of the things that, again, we won't talk a ton about now, but we will later on, is there's going to be two huge migrations that's going to be happening, or two huge population movements. There's going to be a huge movement of enslaved Africans to the Americas. There's also going to be European pioneers who are going to be moving to all of these different places around the world to set up their own colonies or to try to improve their lot. This also leads to a lot of global trade. And so we've already known about the Indian Ocean trade basin, and another one pops up in the Atlantic Ocean, which we call the Atlantic Ocean basin, or we also know by the idea of triangular trade. So essentially what's going to happen is there's going to be this big exchange where Europe is going to bring manufactured goods, and then the Americas is going to provide raw goods. It's called triangular trade because the third part of this is going to be the slaves which are needed to grow and to manage the plantations of the raw goods in the Americas. So Europe, Africa, and America become intertwined economically. Another very important part of global trade is what I mentioned before, these trade routes with the Manila galleons. So basically, a galleon is a monstrous ship, and what's going to happen is that from Mexico to the Philippines, the Spaniards are going to take precious metal, including silver. And what's going to happen is that silver is going to be crucial to China, who has a lot of people, a lot of trade, and have huge issues with paper money. So having that silver is going to be especially important for their economies. Okay? The last thing that I need to talk about is the environmental effects of this. And we start some things which are very difficult because up to this point in general, man had been living in concert with nature. Now, don't get me wrong. Humans versus nature, nature wins every time. There's no way. The question is whether we survive. And that's the big question we're trying to figure out if we can make that happen. So one of the issues is that at this point, because of the economic bent of it and that the people in charge of this stuff don't have to live with the immediate environmental consequences, we have a lot of animals that start to get hunted to extinction or near extinction. So fur, very helpful and luxurious for people throughout Europe and parts of Asia specifically, but other things like whales and codfish for industrial uses. So so you're used to the to the need of oil, which we get, from the United States and Russia and the Middle East. Before that, we used to have to hunt whales to get that oil that we would use for a myriad of different resources. And the other thing is this really starts this relentless human exploitation of the natural environment. So, if you have to live with the consequences of your exploitation of the environment, you tend to be much nicer for it because you want to live. At this point, we start to have this setting where we have people who are rich and far away making decisions about places which are resource rich far away, and again, they don't have to care about the exploitation of the environment because it doesn't affect them. If I have one lake I'm getting my water from, and I start pumping the water out to sell the water to other people, I can't sell it all because I don't want to screw up the lake because that's where I get my water. And the beginning here of global trade and global economic empires is going to start this process, which is going to be difficult, start then, but today many people would say is unsustainable, and that's one of the things we're figuring out. And with that, that is the end of headings 2 and 3.